Hey everyone, happy October. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I've read in September. In September I read 5 books. I completed 5 books. There are some books I'm reading here and there, but I completed 5 books. 3 of them were on the Kindle. 2 of them were books that are advanced reader copies from NetGalley, and 1 of them I actually did as a buddy read. So yeah. What else about the books in terms of stats? I think 2 of them were memoirs. I definitely know 2 of them were memoirs. And 1 was a novella, and the rest were just your normal fictional books. So yeah, let's jump straight into them. The first book that I completed in September was The Tea Master and the Detective. This is actually a novella, so it's very, very short. And I ended up giving it 4 stars. I absolutely loved this. I love the world building in this, and I just love the world that the author created, and I just felt like I wanted there to be more from it. This novella is a retelling of Sherlock Holmes, where you have Sherlock Holmes as this woman character, and you have Watson as a ship. Essentially, this ship is like a mind, a body, a consciousness. I'm not really too sure. But the ship is a tea master, so the ship is able to brew teas to help people with different ailments. In this particular one, we're looking at helping someone travel through, like, I guess, space without the negative side effects. And it seems that people come to the ship for these solutions. And one day in walks our detective, our Sherlock, and they essentially end up sort of, I guess, colluding on a case, because Watson ends up being really curious about our detective, because obviously our detective is really abrasive and rude, etc, etc. It's really hard not to spoil this, because if you know what Sherlock Holmes is about, then you'll know, like, obviously it's a mystery that they're solving. There's obviously some sort of gruesome murder that's gone on, but I think the unique factor about this book is the fact that it's the reimagining of it. Is obviously, there's no qualms with Sherlock being a woman. It's just more what the backstory of this woman is, and then obviously the reimagining of Watson as a ship. It's just such a nice, like, sort of, I don't know, it's just such a nice world that they're in. Like, when I was reading, I could constantly feel like the sort of like hum of what the ship would feel like when people travel inside the ship. And the ship also has its own past and its own demons that you get to know about. The one thing I will say I really liked about this novella was I didn't feel like it was too fast paced. I didn't feel like it was trying to cram too much in. It felt very much evenly paced and what you would expect from a novel, like a full-size novel, but it was just obviously very much shorter. And I was really worried about reading this because I have really struggled with the Binti trilogy, and they've all been novellas, and the first one I just thought was just way too fast paced, like it was just trying to cram too much in. But I loved this book. Like, I really wish that this was a series, because I'd be so intrigued to see sort of more of how this world develops and how she keeps the reader in that world. But so far there is not a sequel or anything like that, but she has written other books that are like sort of set in the same world, so I'm definitely going to go and read those. But it was a fantastic sort of beginning read to September. The next book I read in September was Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and this was an advanced reader's copy from NetGalley. It is by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. I ended up giving this book a 2 out of 5 stars. There wasn't actually anything wrong with this book, I just thought it was okay. This book follows, we're looking at a cafe that basically does time travel, and it spans over 5 different characters and how they use this sort of cafe and its time travel facilities to go back to a situation. One of the wonderful things about this book, and I think it's probably something that I would like in other books if I was to read it about time travel, was the fact that the time travel has rules, and one of the rules is you can't go back and change anything. Not like, because, you know, if you do X, Y, Z will be ruined. Like, it just can't happen. Like, you're not allowed to. It can't happen. Like, it won't change what has happened in the present. So there is no point in you going back. So essentially, people are going back to a time where they know that person will be at that cafe, just so they can relive a certain moment. And I just thought that was a really nice element to it, because then it wasn't a case of, you know, I'm trying to change X, Y, Z, and it didn't become a sort of action-filled story of that. So it was just really nice. All of it took place in the cafe except for, no, all of it took place in the cafe because they were all meeting their characters who had come back to that cafe at that precise time. Sometimes we did go like outside of the world of the cafe, but that was only when like a character was recalling a memory. I can't really say too much about the book other than it was like a woman came into the cafe because she wanted to go back to the time when her and her boyfriend were still steady. Her last scene at the cafe was, you know, I'll spoil this one because it's not a huge spoiler, was a breakup between her and her boyfriend, so she's trying to go back to another time when they were okay. Another woman is going back to talk to her husband. He hasn't passed away, but there's, you know, something there that she wants to go back to. Another one is a sort of mother-daughter duo, which ends up being wrapped up really nicely. Someone comes from the past and comes to visit one of the cafe workers, which doesn't ever usually happen, and they're really unsure of what happens, and that gets wrapped up in like the last chapter. So our last sort of person is focused on one of our cafe characters, and she is the person that ends up sort of travelling back in time. I'm trying to think of what the... Oh, and then the fourth person was a woman who owned a bar across the street. She comes to the cafe to do some time travel as well. They know her, they're all friends with her. So they're all really nice little stories of why they were travelling back, and you know, they were quite emotive. I just felt like, I get this sometimes, like the only other sort of Japanese books I have read is Murakami. I feel like I might have read something else, but I'm not too sure at the moment. But I always feel like there's this sort of haze on them, and that you can't really get that close to the characters or that close to the story, that you're always a bit just like reading things or viewing things behind this sort of wall. And that's what I got from this book. I don't know why, it was just a different feeling, and I was reading, I was like, I recognise this feeling, I've had this feeling before, and it just so happens to be in that sort of book. So I think that's why I gave it 2 out of 5. I felt like it wanted you to get closer to the story, closer to the characters, but then it didn't let you. This was a translated read, so I don't know if it's in the translation, but again, like, because I know I felt that before, I don't think it is. I think it's just the style of writing. The next book that I picked up was Lost in the Spanish Quarter, and it is by Heddi Goodrich. I ended up giving this a 1 out of 5, and it's not actually because I hated the book. I was just confused as to why the book was so long, and part of me did question why the book existed, but honestly, I did write a review about it because this was, again, an advanced reader's copy from NetGalley, so you have to like write reviews about them. And basically what this story is about, and wait, before I talk about what the story is about, the book is sort of being marketed. I don't know if anyone watching will be familiar with the Elena Ferrante series, The Story of a Lost Child. It's a 4-part book. So it's sort of trying to be marketed as similar to that, and it's not that. So really, the comparisons there should not be there. Apart from the fact that they're set in Naples, they don't have any other comparisons. Like, The Story of a Lost Child and the books it follows, you know, like My Brilliant Friend. Actually, I think the first book is called My Brilliant Friend, not The Story of a Lost Child. You know, what happens in those books is, like, not what happens in these books. Like, those books are massively crafted to sort of engage readers who are prepared to sit through a lifetime story of 2 girls of friendship. This book, I felt like, was just trying to be too much, whereas I felt like the Elena Ferrante series, she was just writing with no expectation of, you know, fame or anything like that. But yeah, so this book follows 2 characters, Pietro and Heddi, which I think actually say her name is Eddie. And she is an American who I think has moved around in different places and is now studying in Naples. And Pietro is someone who comes from, I think, the outskirts of Naples or somewhere. He comes from some village in Italy. And they end up meeting at a party. It's actually really weird how they meet. Like, he just sounds really fucking odd, but whatever. And they end up meeting and they end up falling in love. And that's all the book is. The book is us following their love story through, like, I think their final year of uni, they graduate, and what sort of happens. And there's nothing wrong with the love story. Their love story is irritating. Their love story is irritating because we only ever hear it from Heidi's perspective, apart from when we see them exchanging emails. So we're hearing from Heidi's perspective when they are in university and loving each other. And it just felt like she wanted this to be a great love story, and therefore that's how she told the story, and it just felt like it was a lot bigger than it actually was. And I think one of the best bits of the book is the email exchanges between the two, because you obviously see that their relationship didn't last, and they're both at different points in their life. They're in different places physically, and they're emailing each other. And I thought that email exchange was quite nice, because the character we're listening to seems very young and, you know, naive. The two characters we're hearing from in the emails, they seem to have had growth. You know, things have happened in life and they have come to an understanding. And I thought that was really good of the book, but it wasn't enough to save the rest. All the rest of the book was them going to parties, or it's them like at home and making copies and having sex, or it's them going back to Pietro's hometown and staying with his grumpy mother, who doesn't seem to like Eddie. Like, you know, most women face those problems in life. I had no face those problems, I'm not gonna lie, but it's a very common problem. It just seemed like such a huge thing for her, and I was just like, oh my god, get over it. But what this book seemed to do was just regurgitate chapters of their life into chapters of the book, and we weren't seeing any sort of development, not anything different. It was just like, why have I just read another scene of Pietro and Heidi and no growth has happened? The only time a growth happened was when, you know, they reached a sort of point in their relationship where maybe she started to see sense and was a bit like, is this going to go anywhere? But that quickly died down again, so it was a bit pointless. So yeah, whilst I didn't hate the book, I just thought it was way too long. I think the book is about 600 pages or something like that, and I was just like, this book is unnecessarily long. Wait, let me double check that. Sorry, the book is 400 pages, probably just felt like 600 pages. This book could have been cut in half, because there was nothing happening in the development of these two people's relationship. Another thing the book tried to do, which I think I said in my review, is talk about Naples and how much the character loved Naples, and I felt like that was coming from the author and how much she loved Naples. Essentially, like, I felt this story was a bit of a love letter to Naples. There was a lot of talk of, you know, the area of Naples, the humidity, in terms of the weather, how hot it was, and just, you know, how dangerous it was, people shouting, people screeching. There was all that sort of commotion of what it's like to live in Naples, and then talking about the volcano opposite that you can see. There was all of that as well wrapped in there, so the book felt like it wanted to be two different things, and I was just very unsure and really not that interested in either. So yeah, I really wanted to DNF it, but because it was a NetGalley read, I was just like, let's see if we can get through it. Like, it might improve, it didn't improve. By halfway, I knew it wasn't going to improve. So another book that I ended up completing is this book. This is Unladylike, Girl's Guide to Wrestling, and this is by Heather Bandenburg, who also goes by the name Rana Venosa. This is a memoir of Heather's time of when she was wrestling, like how she got into wrestling, and sort of, you know, like, not how she got out of it, because it wasn't anything terrible, but sort of what happened to her life as a result of wrestling. This was a fantastic book. I think I gave this 4 out of 5. One of the things I really liked about this book was it was structured into chapters. So it was structured into chapters where it would focus on something to do with wrestling or something to do with her personally. So, for example, this chapter is the London School of London, wow, can't read, the London School of Lucha Libre. And let's see, another chapter, Girl Gangs. I know there's one there's one called Pain, and there's one called The Win Witch, which is like my favourite name. It's not my favourite chapter in terms of it, because it's very sad. But the reason I say I like this is because she focused on something that she wanted to talk about in this chapter, and then you got the chronological order for it, which I thought was really helpful, because at the same time as reading this, I was reading another memoir which I'll come on to talk about. And I liked this because you never got confused about essentially what was happening, because she split it up into chapters and was tackling one sort of event or theme. You were able to sort of sit in that theme or moment and see how these things fell into place. Essentially, I've bookmarked like loads of little bits in here because I thought there were just so many brilliant things in here, but essentially Heather takes us through how she got into wrestling, you know, how she stayed, what her career in wrestling was like, and then there's also a really lovely bit at the end which is like an appendix, which is a bit of history of wrestling, and it talks about so many things in terms of WWE, which it is now WWE, it was WWF, that I remember from just like my childhood, because I used to watch wrestling and stuff like that. And this book is just fantastic. It's fantastic because you can see that Heather, for one, is a really, really good writer, and obviously she was also a really good wrestler. You found out so many things, and because it was so like personal to Heather as well, it wasn't that you were reading about wrestling and it was very far removed from you, because you were seeing it from her point of view and seeing how she got into it. It just made it all the more exciting. There's so much talk in this book, and you know, of terms of what it's like being a female wrestler, how many female wrestlers there were, you know, paying your dues, things like that. And also one thing that she talked about that I really liked was stereotypes in wrestling, so the different characters that people play. But yes, overall this was a thoroughly enjoyable read. I thoroughly encourage everyone to buy this. I'm sure I spoke about this in the haul when I hauled it, but Heather reached out to me and asked if I wanted to read it, and I was like, yes, it sounds awesome. The final book that I read in September was Red Dust Road by Jackie Kay, and I read this as a buddy read with Pauline from Dancing Lawn, and oh my god, like, so happy I read this book. Like, I don't know about you guys, but when I was younger, me and my friends obviously used to read the same books because you were in school, or like you got books from the library and you could talk about them. And whereas now, like, obviously I can read a book here and talk about it, and then we can talk about it in the comments. It's really nice to be reading a book together, because then you can both talk about it and be like, oh, I thought this, I thought that. So I had never heard of Jackie Kay before. It was actually Pauline that asked me if I'd heard of her, and I checked her out and I just thought she sounded amazing. Jackie Kay is a writer in Scotland, so she's a Scottish writer, and she was adopted when she was a baby. She was adopted by two Scottish women. She is half Nigerian, half Scottish, and yeah, she was adopted, and this book chronicles her finding her birth parents, and sort of what that was like, and what that was like in terms of, and what her childhood was like in terms of her adoption. She grew up in Bishopbriggs, which I think is in Glasgow because that's where I work, but loads of people in Glasgow will be like, that's not in Glasgow, but I think it very much is Glasgow. It's one of those postcode wars. So yeah, this book is her memoir, and it's just so nice. What I said in the other book about the timelines, the one thing I didn't like about this book, so I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, the one thing I didn't like about this book was the jumping timelines. I don't know why the timelines jump. Pauline did say there's something in the introduction that maybe talks about that, but I haven't actually gone back to read about it. But this book was brilliant. It was so good. Jackie is such a good writer. Like, you know, none of it was lyrical or actually in that sense, but it was such a nice, like, account of her life. It was easy to follow. It was just like, you know what I mean, when you're reading a memoir about someone, you don't want it to be like dragging you down, where it's like really tough to like trudge through what happened and things like that. This was so easy to read. Like, I think me and Pauline found it a lot easier to read than like we thought it was going to be. So it says in the back here, when Jackie Kay was a little girl, there came a moment when she realised her skin was a different colour from her mum and dad. Growing up in Glasgow, her childhood was one filled with love, and yet later, pregnant with her own son, she decided she needed to find her birth parents. So Kay set out on a remarkable journey from Scotland to Nigeria, a journey that focused her to confront what it takes to find yourself and what it is that makes us who we are. And that is definitely what happens in this. It really forces you to sort of question identity, but also, you know, like how you're nurtured and things like that. There is so much in this book that I don't want to spoil, but, you know, like you said, she ends up finding her mum. Her mum has moved on from Scotland, and now lives in England. She lives in Milton Keynes, really random, and her dad still lives in Nigeria. And I think one of the most interesting parts about this book is her dad, and like the questions her dad asks her, it's so bloody random. I think one of the beautiful things that Jackie manages to do in this book is weave in parts of her childhood and how happy her childhood was, but also let us know about the, you know, huge hordes of racism that she faced when she was a child growing up in Glasgow. Like, it's really interesting. I think it's only something that people of colour can ever really speak on, because those are people who tell you that, you know, so this area isn't racist, that area isn't racist, and it's like, you don't know that until you're a person of colour and someone's, you know, doing racist acts against you. I can't really go into this book without ruining a lot of it, but there's such wonderful descriptions of when she travels to Nigeria. She travels to Nigeria on several occasions, and it's just her descriptions of like how the colours in Nigeria, the ground, like this is called Red Dust Road after what she sort of imagined like seeing, I guess, a street in Nigeria would be like, and there's a bit where she finds basically what she imagines and she describes that bit, and it's just so nice that you can just sort of imagine the colours, how it felt, and I thought that was a really immersive experience. And I just thought she spoke about her life and, you know, how happy she was, the acts of racism that she had to come up against, what it was like finding her parents, like both of them. Talks about sort of the acceptance and maybe like rejection of like the parents, different family members and stuff like that. With such a sort of like adult-like and honest way. There's the emotions in there of, you know, someone who feels things, but there's also the realization of someone who acknowledges that people have moved on for years, and now she's coming back, and it sort of invites different emotions that maybe you don't expect. Just such a wonderfully crafted book again. Like I'm blown away by this. I felt like this book was a roller coaster of emotions. Like it inspired like joy, it inspired happiness, but there were so many points that my eyes were just watering. And that might have been due to my own emotional state, but there were also just some really sad bits in here, and I just, like I said before in terms of when she described that Red Dust Road, I just felt like it was a really immersive experience. She had a way of writing and writing about certain things that I think really bring out the emotion in the reader. But that is it for all the books that I read in September. I felt like I had a really good reading month. Like I know there were 2 books that in there that I was just like meh, like Before the Coffee Gets Cold, I didn't hate it, it was just like it was okay. The Spanish Quarter, thank God that's over, but then I feel like it just sort of picked up. Like I had a really excellent book at the beginning of the month, and then the last 2 were brilliant. So it was just that middle bit, but I'm happy with that. So yeah, I'm excited to get into October. For some reason I'm feeling like I want to read like dark autumnal reads, and I never get that feeling, but we'll see. I also don't really want to be buying books because I have tons on this bookshelf. So yeah, but thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions about any of the books that I've read, and I will catch you in another video. Bye!